But what we want to do is we want to go to dampening, and we can turn on angular dampening, which will slow an object down as it's spinning. And the same can be used for linear dampening, so you won't just keep flying forwards regardless of your movement. So if I test this now, this should now slow down over time. Now, whilst that's loading, what I'll do is I'm going to create this second piece of code. Now, the way that I'm going to do that is if I hold down Alt, in a similar way with Photoshop, that when you use the Move tool and you hold down Alt, it'll create a duplicate. You can create a duplicate of this section of code here. Let's just quickly test this and see if this works. Yep. So it slows down if you let go. So just close that. And you may have seen as well that it's now crisp because of us turning off anti-aliasing. So if I hold Alt now, click and drag, you can see that this is now created a bunch of different copies. So snap that into place, and now I'm going to use the opposite key, so left. If left is down, what are we going to do? We need to set this to an opposite. So we can either set it to negative, so negate, so we can use a section of code for this, or we could literally just do minus 150. If you imagine kind of the spectrum, at one end for left you've got over here, you've got 0 in the middle, which is motionless, and then 150 over here, which is rotating right. So now we should be able to turn left and right. So if I click test one more time, you'll be able to see the character turning left and right. Now what we might do later on is add like a kind of like a booster effect, like a rocket booster effect, so you can see like a little jet kind of rotating you in a certain direction, like they do on a lot of space films. So yeah, I can turn left and right now, which is great. But now what I need to do is I need to send my character in a certain direction. Now, for a lot of movement in Stencil, you'd use something like X and Y speed, which is the speed along the X and Y axis. So X and Y. But for what we're wanting to do, we're wanting to send the character off at a certain angle or direction. So if we go into motion here, we're going to want to set its speed in a certain direction. So if I just drag this here, and I click and drag this out, this is setting the force of the direction the character is going to go. Now if I just connect this as it is now, and then set it to, let's say, 0 degrees 20 force, regardless of what direction I'm going or facing, it'll just keep moving me in a straight line in a certain way. So what I can do is I can use the find what the current direction of our character is and tell it to move in that direction. So if you see here, the ship moves off the screen at quite a high speed. So let's click and drag this section of code, the direction of self, into place, and give that a quick test. And that should, as I rotate the scene, sorry, as I rotate the ship, it should keep changing the direction of the way it's moving. One thing I might do for demonstrational purposes is, if you've noticed, the scene is quite small here, which is quite an issue for demonstrating. If I go to settings, I can go to web or whatever platform I'm planning to distribute it to, and I can scale the actual scene. So I'm going to set the scale for what I want it to be, and then set how I want it to scale. So I'm just going to do stretch to fit, and then click OK. I'm going to reduce the speed that it's going so we can see a little bit more visually what's happening. And then I'm going to quickly test it, and you should be able to see that whilst it is moving in a, the apparently correct direction, or it is moving with the left and right keys, it is going the wrong way. The ship is flying left, as you can see here. Oh, sorry, flying right. So what we want to do is we want to make it that it's kind of drunkenly flying around. What we want to do is rotate our character, but not in the code, just in the appearance. So if I wanted to change this, I would go down to this little kind of cog over here, and I could rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. You could also do flipping horizontal and a bunch of others. It's really, really useful because it means you don't have to produce your actors, your sprites in loads of different directions. I think I mentioned that in the previous videos. So if I save this now and just quickly test this, the ship should be flying around with me being able to guide it in the correct direction. What we'll quickly add after this is the ability to choose when to stop, because at the moment it's just gonna, we haven't given it any reason to. We haven't said, if, oh, and I've gone off the screen bounds, but you can see it kind of beginning to turn as I went left and right. Where was I? So we need to tell it to stop when it's not meeting these requirements. And those requirements are going to be if up is pressed. Sorry, if up is down. If we did pressed it, you'd have to keep spamming the button to keep it moving. So with this in place now, if up is held down, it's going to keep pushing itself in the direction that it's facing. So now we should be able to navigate the scene a little bit easier. And once again, we don't need to worry about when it's been released, because what it does is it naturally slows down over time, which saves us having to do one little section of code. Having said that, we will cover that in another tutorial. But yeah, you can see this ship just kind of floating around, which is pretty fun. Now, the only other thing that we could do to add to this is some kind of animation to be able to see when it's flying. Now, in a traditional method, we could do something like when the key is released. So for example, when you release the key, set the animation to idle. When the key is pressed, set it to move forwards. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you a pretty kind of sneaky method of sidestepping that. If I go to my appearance of my character, if you remember before, I had the two animations together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste the first animation back into, the idle animation back into the movement one. So I'm going to get rid of this idle animation. You can see that little star next to it. That indicates what the primary animation is going to be. So I'm just going to leave that as the name default, just kind of as ship for now. And what I'm going to do is, you can see that this is flashing in the corner. The boosters are flickering, but it's not what I want. So we're going to make it that it's going to loop. It's not going to loop. So after it's played through the frames, it's just going to stay at the end frame, which means if we are pushing a button, it's going to keep going back to this first frame, and then when we let go, it'll play through to the end and switch to this last frame where there's no power and it's not, the ship's not launching itself forwards. So if I go to events, the code for that would be going into actor, draw, and you can see we've got all the animation based sections of code here. If we wanted to do, idle, make the animation turn to idle or moving, all we would have to do is type in the name of the animation that matched the animations in here. That is case sensitive, so you have to make sure you get it right. But what we're going to use here, because we've made this change, is we can switch to frame 0 when our ship is moving forwards, and that way it'll revert to our ship animation, so the kind of ship active animation, and because it's an always, it's surrounded by the always statement, it's gonna sustain changing it to that frame until you let go. It's pretty handy. Let's just very quickly see that in action. Okay, so let me just make this full screen. So you can see like the little rocket flare coming out of the back of it now. I think I could probably do to tweak the numbers, because it's a lot of side motion left and right, but not much thrust. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm gonna cover just for now. I'll next in the next section, I'm gonna cover some other stuff. So I probably will look into getting the characters shooting, and yeah, I'll have a ponder, and yeah, I'll let you know what I'm gonna do next. Okay.